traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. British author Douglas Murray has a new book out on democracies and death cults, which is a good read. I picked that up. He was on with Joe Rogan as he's been making the rounds, in part talking about the Middle East and Islamist terrorist groups like Hamas. But on Joe Rogan, he got into it with Rogan and his sidekick. It was sort of interesting, challenging Rogan on the guest selections he's made to address the war in the Middle East. And, you know, platforming the Daryl Coopers of the world. And Tucker Carlson did too. And Douglas Murray addresses that much more eloquently and pointedly than I could, so let's hear him.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, sir.
Since the war in Israel began, and since the war in Ukraine began, you've had quite a lot of people who are very against both in different ways.
Yes.
Do you think you've had enough people on who are supportive of either war?
I don't know that word enough, if that's a good word.
Let's say enough people who are on the side of Israel instead of wild critics.
Well, I've had a few. I mean, I believe Gadsad is on the side of Israel.
For sure.
Jordan is on the side of Israel.
Mike Baker, Coleman Hughes.
Yeah.
Coleman did it for like 20 minutes, so it wasn't why he was here.
No, I mean, none of them is why they're here. You know, it's a good question.
Do you think you've tilted one way?
Me personally?
No, just with the guests you've had.
The guests? Yeah, probably more tilted towards the idea that perhaps the way they've done it is barbaric.
But why do you think that is? Just out of interest. I'm just interested in your selection of guests because you're like the world's number one podcast.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think about it that way. I just think I'd like to talk to this person.
But can I just... sorry, it's your show, but
sure.
If you're going to interview historians of the conflict, or historians in general, why would you get somebody like Ian Carroll? Or...
Yeah, but Ian Carroll, I didn't bring him on for that purpose. I brought him on because I want to find out, like, how does one get involved in the whole conspiracy theory business? Because his whole thing is just conspiracies.
Sure.
You know?
But do you have any... I mean, there's been a tilt in the conversation, both conversations, in the last couple of years, and it's largely to do with people who have appointed themselves experts, who are not experts.
You mean like Ian? I don't think he appoints himself an expert in anything.
Who's that other dude who thinks he's an expert on Churchill?
Daryl Cooper does not think he's an expert.
In fact, I think it's everybody else is always calling him an expert, and he's like, I'm just a history.
Have you ever absorbed any of his material? Have you ever consumed any of his podcasts or anything like that?
I tried.
Yeah?
It's pretty hard to listen to somebody who says, I don't know what I'm talking about, but now I'm going to talk. Or I don't know about this, or I'm not capable of debating this historian, but I'm going to just tell you what I think.
Yeah, but that's not exactly what Daryl was saying. I mean, Daryl's point of view, however you feel about this, what Daryl's saying is he doesn't really like doing debates. He likes to do long format stuff where he can really explain his position.
If you throw a lot of out there, there's some point at which I'm just raising questions is not a valid thing. You're not raising questions. You're not asking questions. You're telling people something.
Do you think Daryl's doing that?
I think there's a whole bunch of guys doing that. I think Dave is doing that, very obviously. Dave's a comedian, but he's now mainly talking about Israel.
David, I think his name's David Smith, the sidekick, who you just addressed there. That was great. I mean, Douglas Murray is very good, and that was very good. For more on this, the media piece of it, because it's an important part of understanding the public's response and where public support falls with respect to Israel in particular. Jonathan Tobin joins us. He's the editor-in-chief of Jewish News Syndicate. Jonathan, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Great to be back with you. Thanks.
You think Douglas Murray was making an important point, impressing an important point on Joe Rogan?
Well, yes. Yeah, Joe Rogan's had a lot of great episodes. You know, he's part of something very positive, breaking the monopoly of the corporate media on a lot of issues. But he has platformed a lot of ignoramuses and a lot of deeply prejudiced and really people who have just bought into the narrative of terrorists and, frankly, anti-Semites about Israel, about the war on Hamas, as well as Douglas Murray just pointed out, as we heard, people who have, bizarre, theories about World War II, who basically are basically repeating Nazi propaganda from 1942. So, yeah, Joe Rogan's made a lot of bad decisions about platforming, even as much as he's done a lot of good things.
Well, and the point that Murray is making too, which is not specific to Rogan, he's just an example, is you're platforming people that that announce they don't know what they're talking about, but we're supposed to listen to them talk, virtually do that, and also serve as sort of apologists or even fronts for some of the most obviously noxious anti-Semitism that you see spilling out of college campuses into lower Manhattan, for example.
Yeah, the key here is it's not just these nutcase podcasters who suddenly become celebrities and get a lot of views on YouTube. It's that a lot of the so-called experts about the Middle East, who have been wrong about everything for the last 4 decades, are still being treated as the smart people rather than as the dumb people. They're the ones who keep telling us that all Israel has to do to have peace is just to make more concessions to the Palestinians, give them their own state, even though Israel has offered them a state numerous times. They always get turned down because the Palestinians don't want peace. They want no Israel. That's what this war is about. Hamas is about the extinction of Israel, the genocide of its people. October 7th was the trailer for what they wanted to do to everybody in Israel. And yet, all we talk about is Israel's efforts to wipe out the terrorists, which is what any sane country would do when faced with that kind of threat. And they become these so-called experts, as well as corporate media, the New York Times. I write about it all the time, the Washington Post. They're like the stenographers for Hamas. They keep saying, oh, Israel's creating more terrorists, when in fact, and they're making it worse. It's like, worse? What could be worse than October 7th? They're already convinced that they want to destroy Israel. They want to kill Jews wherever they can find them. That's the problem, not whether Israel is doing this thing or that thing, or that it's so terrible that, an area where the people support and participate in terrorism, which is essentially a terrorist state, is suffering for the decisions that they made, which is terrible. It's tragic and all that. But this is their choice. They have, if they wanted this war to end, they could have just given back the hostages. They won't do it. They won't do it, not just because Israel's, being mean. They won't do it because their goal is endless war. And it's time people who talk about this subject acknowledge this fact.
Speaking of the hostages, there were 3 of the freed hostages at NRCC dinner featuring President Trump the other night, earlier this week. And here's what one of the released hostages, Keith Siegel, had to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Trump. I'm here, and I'm alive. President Trump, you saved my life. You saved the life of 33 hostages that because of your efforts and you're setting the hostage crisis at the high priority of what you're doing.
Was not an easy thing to do, given for either Bibi or for Trump to have that cessation in hostilities to get some hostages released, given the moral imperative to eradicate Hamas.
It's a difficult decision for both Israel, especially for Israel, as well as the United States, because getting the hostages home, there are only 25 of them who are left alive. There are 59, 25 live people and basically 34 corpses that Hamas is still holding on to. And the idea that they're ever going to give up all of them and lay down their arms is a myth. That they're always going to hold on to some, as their insurance policy, because they're criminal.
Right.
And it's a difficult moral calculus. It's something that Jewish liturgy actually deals with, because the Jews over the last 2,000 plus years have had a lot of unfortunate, experience with hostage takers. And on the one hand, redeeming hostages, ransoming hostages is a priority, something, it's a positive thing you're obligated to do. On the other hand, our texts and scholarship has always said you should never pay too much, because you're just encouraging more hostage taking. And that's the problem here. Right. If the only goal is just to redeem, to get the hostages out, I understand that. That's great. And if you're a member of the family if you have a loved one who's being held hostage, you'd trade the entire world. You wouldn't care. I know I wouldn't. I'm sure you wouldn't. Most people wouldn't, to get your loved one free. But what Netanyahu, and to a lesser extent Trump, has to weigh in this is that if you let Hamas live, you're just asking for more October 7th. You're asking for more terrorism. It's like during World War II. If not, the Nazis had sort of offered the freedom of a few of the people that they held, but they said the price of this is that we get to go on being a Nazi regime in Germany. What would the Allies have said? The Allies said to all offers, no, unconditional surrender. In the end, that has to be, and that is Israel's policy towards Hamas. If they want to live, they have to lay down their arms and get out. And if they don't, ultimately they're going to be killed. And that's the only equation that makes any sense.
Well, and of the 29 hostages that are still alive, how many are Americans?
I don't know off the top of my head. There are still some who are Americans. It's a handful, maybe 3 or 4. But the point is, yes, we want all those people out. They never should have been, as Trump keeps saying, they never should have been taken in the first place. And if you're going to reward the people who took the hostages and committed unspeakable crimes alongside that, all you're doing is paying for more terrorism, more suffering. That's a mistake Israel's made in the past. And, Netanyahu exchanged over 1,000 terrorists who were in prison, including some who were murderers, for one Israeli soldier who had been kidnapped. And he made that deal in 2011. And at the time, most people thought, well, Hamas can't really do much harm to Israel. I guess it's okay because we want that boy to be free. And, getting that boy freed was a good, righteous thing. But in the end, all such deals like that just lead to more suffering, more terrorism, and ultimately to October 7th. And, if you're in charge of a country, I wouldn't want to be in Netanyahu's place being, harangued by the family members saying, do anything to get my loved one free. And, in their place, I would do the same as them. Yeah. And so would anyone else. But in the end, we have to get rid of the terrorists. If we don't get rid of the terrorists, you're just getting more terrorism. And if you think it's just about Israel, you're wrong, because Hamas is part of Iran's international terror network. They are at war with the West. They are at war with America just as much as they are with Israel. And if you think it won't eventually hurt us, you're wrong.
Well, I mean, we see this. We see this in full color on college campuses with terrorist sympathizers. Douglas Murray made this point the other day on an interview that I saw, with respect to the conversation about Mahmoud Khalil, that Columbia University student who's scheduled for deportation, having his student visa pulled.
They're having a hearing today.
Professional student at 30, which is a whole other story. Yeah. But anyway, you see it with these students for justice in Palestine chapters, if you will. It is always down with America, along with down with Israel. It's always America is part of committing the genocide along with Israel. And, the thing that Murray said, I would be willing to hear Mahmoud Khalil out if part of what he had to say and what the rest of his group had to say was return the hostages, free the hostages from the Israeli hostages, free the American hostages. But they don't care about the hostages, even Americans. Even at the same time, they pretend that they're cloaked in, sort of the American ideals and free speech and so on and so forth. None of those things are at play, and they tell you exactly who they are, and by their silence, as much as by what they actually say.
These are the people who go around tearing down posters of hostages. Kidnap. Like, who would tear down a poster of a missing dog or cat? These are these people, and these are about missing people. And if you listen to them, if you listen to what they say, read what they write, course they don't care about free speech because they're about suppressing other people's free speech. What they believe in when they say from the river to the sea, and sometimes in even more explicitly, they believe in Israel's destruction. They believe in the genocide of the Jewish people. That's what they're advocating for. They think the hostages had it coming because they're Jews living in the ancient Jewish homeland. That's their position. All Jews in Israel have no right to be there. All Jews, Jews have no rights, period. They are for the terrorists. This is explicit. Now, in terms of whether Khalil should be deported, listen, we don't let in people into this country who advocate who are basically supporters of terrorism. That's, he almost certainly lied on all of his forms to get his student visa and then to get his green card. He's a liar. He is, a propagandist, a paid propagandist for the worst terrorists on this planet. And the idea that he is a martyr for free speech, that's a joke. We're not, at Columbia, speaking as somebody who went to school there a long time ago, we're not talking about them just advocating for some stupid, bad position. They engaged in illegal acts. They took over buildings, illegal encampments, acts of intimidation and even violence against Jewish students. That's not free speech under any definition.
Jonathan Tobin is the editor-in-chief of Jewish News Syndicate, jns.org. Jonathan Tobin, thanks for joining us. As always, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest-growing independently owned business bank. It's a bank where relationships still matter. Signature Bank knows your name and your story. I'm Dan Proft, and I know this because Signature Bank is my business bank.
I'm Robert Anderson, president of McLaughlin Body Company in the Quad Cities, and a customer of Signature Bank. When our 100-year-old family-owned manufacturing company was looking for a new bank, we found an excellent partner with Signature Bank. Signature Bank understands the challenges with manufacturing in today's highly competitive environment. We recently participated in the New Markets Tax Credit Program, and we're fortunate to have the experts at Signature Bank help us navigate the complexities of this program. With Signature Bank's support, we were able to expand not only our facility, but ultimately our business. If you're looking for a trusted banking partner for your business, look to Chicago's own Signature Bank.
Signature Bank is looking for their next success